Aren't these flowers beautiful? These are snapdragon flowers, and they come in so many different colors. Hybridization experiments conducted on pea plants were conducted on snapdragon plants too. Apart from snapdragon plants, experiments were conducted on birds like pigeons and poultry, and on several animals like mice, rabbits, cats, guinea pigs, and even man. However, it was discovered that the law of dominance didn't hold true in all cases. That is, Mendel's laws were not universal in occurrence. To understand this better, let's further study the experiment conducted on the snapdragon plants. When a true breeding or a pure line red-flowered snapdragon with genotype R was crossed with a true breeding white-flowered snapdragon with genotype r, the results were quite different from what was seen in the case of the pea plants. The flowers of the F1 hybrid were pink, and the genotype was R. That is, the F1 hybrid flowers had a phenotype that resembled neither of the parents, but was in between the two. Now, the flowers of the F1 hybrid were self-pollinated, and the genotypic ratios obtained in the F2 hybrid were 1:2:1, the same result obtained by Mendel in his experiments on peas. However, the phenotypic ratios obtained in the snapdragon plant, as you can see, is also 1:2:1, which is different from the ratio 3:1 dominant is to recessive ratio in the pea plant. So, in the case of incomplete dominance, both genotypic and phenotypic ratios are the same. That is, 1:2:1. Thus, when a dominant allele does not completely mask the phenotypic expression of the recessive allele in a heterozygote, a blending of both dominant and recessive traits takes place in the F1 and F2 heterozygotes. This phenomenon is called incomplete dominance. This is why the phenotypic ratios obtained in the experiment on snapdragon plants different from those in the pea plants. It is the gene for flower color that controls the amount of pigment in petals. Each allele is a code for a trait, that is, specific amount of pigment. When both alleles for pigment are present, the petals are dark red due to heavy pigment production. On the other hand, if none of the alleles for pigment exist, the flower is white. However, when only one of the alleles is present, only half the pigment is produced, creating a pink shade. The alleles are therefore exhibiting incomplete dominance, which is a form of intermediate inheritance where one allele for a specific trait is not completely dominant over the other allele. But why is it that some alleles are dominant while others are recessive? Let's understand this by studying the functioning of a gene in greater detail. As you know, a gene is the unit of heredity that occupies a fixed position on a chromosome called the locus. A gene generally has two forms called alleles. In homozygotes, the alleles are the same, while in heterozygotes, they are not identical. An allele may be different due to certain changes it has undergone, which modify the information contained by that particular allele. For example, let's consider a gene that contains information for producing an enzyme. This gene contains two copies, which are the two allelic forms. Now, let's assume that the normal allele produces the normal enzyme that is required to transform a substrate S. According to assumed facts, the modified allele could be responsible for producing a normal enzyme, a less efficient enzyme, a non-functional enzyme, or no enzyme at all. Now, if the modified allele produces a normal or a less efficient enzyme, we can say that the modified allele is equivalent to the unmodified or normal allele. That is, the modified allele will produce the same phenotype or trait, or in other words, it will bring about a transformation in the substrate S. Such equivalent allele pairs are quite common. However, if the modified allele produces a non-functional enzyme or no enzyme, then the phenotype is dependent on the functioning of the unmodified or the normal allele. Here, the unmodified functioning allele or the normal allele that represents the original phenotype is the dominant allele, and the modified allele is generally the recessive allele. So, in the example we just saw, the recessive trait was due to a non-functional enzyme or because no enzyme was produced. Therefore, incomplete dominance causes a distortion of the normal phenotypic ratio and results in offspring with a combined phenotype.